Alright, hello everyone. This is your second recap video for your first week in Unreal Engine. Now, in this video, I'm going to talk about templates and how to use them. We're going to talk a little bit about maps and how they work inside of Unreal Engine, how to make maps. We're going to be looking at the environment light mixer. Now, the environment light mixer is a fun tool to get your external lighting set up very quickly. Then we're going to talk a little bit about materials and how to swap them out in different ways to change materials and apply materials to your actors inside of Unreal Engine, particularly static meshes. Then we're going to be talking about swapping out static meshes. So having one actor that you've placed and then using the kind of static mesh input to kind of swap out like we did with materials. And then we're going to be talking about geometry brushes. Now, geometry brushes are really fun tools to help you create interesting shapes. It's just kind of a step up from what we initially did, where we took a cube and we were just trying to manipulate it to create the shape that we wanted. So let's get into it. I'm going to go ahead and open up my Epic Games launcher, press the library tab, and I'm going to launch Unreal Engine 5.02. So we just give it a minute for it to start. All right, now here's where you can kind of see your different types of templates. You have the first person, the third person, the top down, vehicle, and then AR and VR. So just using the vehicles as an example, I'm just going to go ahead and create a vehicle project. Now these templates at this point in time may seem without any use, but as you develop skill with Unreal Engine, you will realize that these templates are kind of these guidebooks to, if you were making a particular type of game, this is how you would do it. But for now, I'm just going to show you how to play around with these templates. So I've opened up the vehicle template right here. I'm just going to press dismiss and update. And you can see without doing anything at all, I can just press the play button and I have this car that I can drive around using the W, S, and AD, and I can hit the brakes and the lights kind of light up like this. So how would you use this? What you could actually do at this early stage, I'm just going to hide the place actors panel and the content browser to make it look like probably what you're seeing. You can go ahead and drop some shapes in there. So let's put a cube. Let's go ahead and put a sphere, and then maybe you can even scale these up. So create something that maybe you and a friend can compete against, that maybe you've made some obstacles along the way, and then you and your friend or whoever else is playing this game, both of you can try to see who can get through this level as fast as possible. I did really well there. I thought I would hit the ball. But anyway, so this is an example. This is a very kind of basic way of you building something that you can interact with, and not only you, but a friend as well. So I'm going to go ahead and exit this, and I'm just going to open up another template. So let's go ahead and open up Unreal Engine. Just give it a second to start. I'm going to go to library again and press launch. Okay, now for the second run, I'm going to use the first person template, and let's go ahead and open this, and I'm just going to type FPS. All right, let's press create. You can see on the desktop that it's creating these projects like what we talked about in our first session, where whatever is in your content browser is basically replicating what's actually on your file system. So here we have a first person template. Again, I can hit play and you can see my character is here. It's a first person game. I can go pick up the gun, and word of warning, this can be a little loud. Sometimes I've had my headphones plugged in and I just fire the gun and it's been so loud that I almost thought might have lost some of my hearing, but I'm going to try and fire this and hopefully it's not too bad. You couldn't hear that, but it was pretty loud on my speakers. But anyway, so this is the first person template, and you can see just by shooting balls, I'm interacting with the physics in the game. All these blue boxes are pretty interactive. So again, what could we possibly do here? You could take this cube and maybe make a tower that you or your friends could knock down. And in making these cubes, you're also kind of practicing your abilities with the move, scale, and rotate tool. So maybe we've got a tower of cubes here that we can play with and try to knock down. So I'm going to try and stack these cubes. Let's see if they're falling over. Yes, that is a bit too much to the right. Let's see if this is balanced. Nope, still not balanced. Okay, let's just take one more and kind of put it up here. Let's see if that works. Okay, that's better. And then maybe I can just duplicate these and kind of put them up here. So I've got this big stack of big stack of blocks, excuse me. So you can see here, I can try and maybe knock this over and then they all fall down. And then I can have more fun by shooting these blocks. You could try and actually shoot these blocks multiple times, try and launch it out of the arena, something like that. But yeah, anyway, so this is just basic ways of playing around with the different templates inside of Unreal Engine just to see what's possible and give you ideas for your first possible game or your first game that you think you're going to make. So let's get into the main kind of meat of the tutorial. So what we're going to recap next is maps and levels inside of Unreal Engine. I'm just going to minimize this so I can quickly bring this up as needed. Now, in Unreal Engine, if you want to go ahead and make a map, I'm just going to open a new project and I'm just going to call this week1 underscore S2. Right, let's give it a second for it to build itself and initialize. All right, so we have our third person template. You might have seen this. You might remember this actually from the first lesson that we had, the first session we had. It's a simple third person game that you can run around and jump. But we're going to talk about maps and levels using this as a learning base. Now to make a new map inside of Unreal Engine, a new level, this right here is basically your map, right? So you can go to the file menu and press new level. And then you get one of four options. You get the open world, you get an empty open world, you get a basic and an empty level. Now these are just basically two different types of two scales of the, so open world is much larger and basic is smaller, obviously. So if I go ahead and create, let's start with the basic so you develop an understanding of this. So if I go and create basic, you can see I get this open field or this open plane, and I just get some basic lighting and a skybox working on this. But this has to be saved. So to save a level inside of Unreal Engine, you can see its name right now is untitled, which means it hasn't been saved. So if I press this floppy disk icon here, this will let me save a level. Now it's going to ask you where do you save your level. It's a good idea to save it under maps. So you have maps, and then inside of this, I'm going to double click to go inside this, and I'm just going to call this blank map, or you can call it whatever you want. So once I hit save, you'll notice up here that untitled that it was there before is now changed into blank map. So I'm going to go ahead and make an open world, for example, and you'll kind of see the difference between the two. This has, of course, a much larger field to work with, and you also have this world partition sort of window on the right, and you can see as I kind of fly around this level, this little diamond over here is actually moving. So if you've played any games in which there's a radar or maybe there's a map where you are in the level, so you can, this is similar to that, and then you can use world partition to kind of go to this area. So I'll just fly up a little bit and you can see I'm precisely there. Or you can let's go over here, let's say here, I double click, I'm now here. Or I can double click and I'm now here. So these are mostly for like open world games, like if you were trying to make something like Horizon or Elden Ring with really, really large environments, and the player can go from one area to another area with like towns in the middle. This is what you would use for it. But that's kind of out of the scope of this tutorial. So I'm just going to go ahead and save this as a different map. I'm going to say open world and I'm going to press save. You can see that its name gets changed from untitled. This will just take a little longer, obviously, because it's a larger map. But we'll just give it a second for it to save. And then you'll see that its name will get changed from untitled to open world. There you go. It's been saved as open world. Now to switch between levels, I'm just going to Control B, bring up my content browser here. I can just go into maps and you can see both our maps are kind of there. So I can go double click on blank map and it will load up that blank map for me. Right? So that's how you switch between levels. You'll find the level that you want inside the content browser and then you double click to switch that level. Now we're going to go to our next subject, which is the environment light mixer. So the environment light mixer is basically a quick way to get exterior lighting set up very quickly. So when you make a blank level, you won't have to use this. This is only so that I'm showing you where it is in case you're starting with a blank level, and I'll show you that workflow in a second. So if you look at this level right now that's been created, this blank empty level, you can see on the right here, you've got a directional light, an exponential height fog, sky atmosphere, skylight, a sky sphere, and volumetric cloud. So if I put all of these kind of off, you can see that the light completely disappears from our scene. So if I change this to unlit, you can see we still have that ground plane there, but because there's no lighting, it's not visible. So if I slowly put these on, this is the directional light, that is the fog. Now we put the sky atmosphere on, you can see it with and without fog. And then we have the skylight, the sky sphere, and then the volumetric clouds that interact with everything. And these clouds are obviously animated, so they're not static clouds. It makes everything look very nice. So setting this up, especially for a newcomer, might be a little bit annoying, or a process that you may not always get, because you have to go through a few steps to get them to all talk to one another. But there's an easy way to do it. So let's say I copy this ground plane and I'm going to go ahead and make an empty level. So I paste it here. We know our ground plane is in the level, but if I was to go over to lit, there's no lighting here. But you can very quickly get that all set up for you by using the environment light mixer. So all I'm going to do is press the window button, press environment light mixer, and then you get this window that pops up. It may not stick to the left there like it did for me, but it'll pop up something like this. So actually, I'm just going to go ahead and reset my layout. So default editor layout, and I'm going to show you what it comes up. It comes up like this. So once the environment light mixer is up, all you have to do is kind of just press these buttons, and all 6 of these together, you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And that will basically create your lighting for you. All right, so a very quick way to get your exterior lighting working. And you can see if I go and drop a cube here, all the shadowing, everything is quickly working right out of the box, and my clouds are also moving, right? So if you want to experiment with all these different types of things that you've just created, you can also open up the environment light mixer. You can dock it to the right side or the left side. I always get that wrong. And then you can actually experiment with changing some of the settings. So maybe like the intensity of the light, or you have the sky atmosphere. You can change some of the colors there. So it's really fun. The environment light mixer just gives you control of all your lighting in the scene, and then you can change all of them on the fly. Right, so that's our environment light mixer. I'm just going to go ahead and delete these because my sky is looking absolutely strange. And I am going to go ahead and open that blank level that we created earlier. Okay, so let's progress further. Now I'm going to talk about changing out your first materials. Now in Unreal Engine, there's a few ways to kind of set up your materials. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I am going to use a cube right here. Let's place it here. I am going to use, actually, let me just dock this panel here. It'll be a little faster for me. So I'm going to use a cube. I'm going to use a sphere. I'm going to use a cylinder. And let's use a cone. So we have some nice primitive shapes to assign materials to. So inside of the starter content folder, now last week I encouraged everyone to create the project with the starter content folder checked on. So what you can do is Control B to bring up your content browser. You can dock it if you want. That's okay. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to press All so that I'm at the highest level of the project. And then I'm going to go to Filter, and I'm going to filter for all the materials in my project. So when I press this, you can see Unreal filters all the materials. And remember, we know that the materials have that green outline underneath them, that bright green outline underneath them. So these are all the materials in my project right now. These are all the possible materials. So let's talk about the ways you can assign these materials to your mesh. The first way you can do this is by simply dragging and throwing it on the mesh. So if I take this, for example, this M brick clay material, I can take it and throw it on this mesh, and it gets assigned. You can see I can take another material, throw it, it gets assigned there, no problems at all. So I can take that rocky texture, apply it there. I can take, let's use this metal gold over here. And then I can take, for example, this tech hex style and throw it on there. So that's one way to apply materials. The other way you can apply materials is simply by going down to the details panel, and you can see over here, it says materials. And we know that element 0, so I'll just take a screenshot of this so everyone can see. We can see here that underneath materials, it's got only one element, and it's element 0. And it's expecting a material. And we know this because, of course, it's written up here. And there's a bright green kind of line underneath the the icon here. But meshes can have more than one materials, which is why it says element 0. So you may get a mesh with many materials on it. So it'll be 0, 1, 2, 3, up to quite a large number. So because there's only one material on this right now, it just says element 0, right? So what we're going to do is let's say we want to put, let's use, I'm trying to find one that I like. Let's use this basic acid 01. So let's say I want to put basic acid 01 on this. I can drag, and you can see there's a blue kind of line that gets, a blue kind of box that gets drawn around this object here. So you can see it's this blue box. This means I can drag and kind of drop it in there. So if I drag and drop it in there, this material then gets assigned to that object. It's literally the same as doing this. So we can see if there was another material put on this before and I drag and drop this, this gets changed to that material. So it's the same operation, just a different way of doing it. The third way you can do this is if I select the sphere, for example, I can select whichever material I want from the content browser. So let's say it's this M cobblestone pebble. So I've got that selected. What you can do is under this object, I'm just going to take a screenshot again. And what you can do is you can use this button right here. And this button basically tells Unreal whatever asset, whatever material you have selected from the content browser, attempt to insert this material into the slot. And the reason I say attempt is because if it's the wrong type, so it's not a material, it's a static mesh, it won't work, right? So we can see that if I just select this brick cut stone and I press this button, it applies that to the material. So if I select, for example, this green object, it applies that to the material. I can use whatever object I've selected. I do this, it applies that to the material. So 3 ways we can do it. Just a quick recap. You can A, throw it on the object itself. You can B, select and then slot it in using the select asset from content browser. Or C, you can drag and drop it in there, provided you see that a blue kind of window's been drawn around it. That basically is Unreal Engine telling you, hey, this can be kind of slot in here. This can be input here, right? So that's just a couple of ways to deal with materials inside of Unreal Engine, just at this phase, all right? Now we're going to talk a little bit about a second type of introductory slotting that we have, which is static meshes. So if you kind of take your cube and place it down here, you can also see that another type of object we can work with just off this basic second session is a static mesh. So that means that this slot is expecting a static mesh. So let's try and replicate our process again. I'm going to dock this in the layout and then I'm going to press all and I'm going to filter this time for static mesh. Excuse me. And then you can see that these are all the static meshes that come with your project, right? And a lot of them are from the starter content folder. So for example, let's say I'm working to build a simple house. So I'm going to use these pieces on the bottom here, this wall, this window wall. Let's say I want to work with one of these. Now these can be dragged and dropped into the viewport as well. No problem with that. You can do it that way as well. But I'm just going to show you how we can input different static meshes just because I know this is accepting a static mesh. So I'm going to use the wall 400 by 300. I'm going to select that in the content browser and I'm just going to press use selected asset from content browser. And you can see now this asset is using this asset. We've taken the static mesh and we've plugged it in here. So let me just take this down and I have my first kind of wall ready to go. So let's copy paste it and let's rotate it outwards. I'm just going to use the move, scale and rotate tool to place this a little better. Remember, you can hold shift to kind of ensure that that is exactly where you want it to be. Okay, that looks pretty good. Now I'm going to change this into a wall mesh. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the other technique to do this. So I'm going to use wall 400 by 300. I'm going to drag and you can see that blue box kind of gets drawn around it because that's Unreal's way of saying, hey, this can kind of get plugged in here. So I'm going to go take it, drop it in there, and I've got a wall without a inset or a cutaway for an entry point. So let's copy paste, take this over here. Again, I'm going to hold shift just to kind of lock the camera with this so I can move, the camera moves with this object. And then finally, I'm going to Control C, Control V, and then make my final piece here. So I'm going to just put this with the wall. Now remember, I told you that when you scale an object, so the scaling is wrong here. So if I was to use the scaling tool, it's going to scale from wherever the pivot point is. So it's going to actually scale from here. So if I was to scale this up, notice how it's scaling from that point. That's kind of the anchor. Some of the other tools refer to it as an anchor. So I'm just going to turn snapping off, and we will just get it to scale at that point. So I'll turn snapping back on. So my house is kind of ready. I am going to Control C, Control V. Let's rotate this downwards and then place this on the roof like that. I'm just going to turn scaling back off so I can scale this to exactly what I want. Okay, so let's put this here. Scale this up just a little bit and then move this just so that it covers. I'm going to put the move snapping off just so I can ensure that this wall is exactly where I need it to be. So holding shift and then it's perfect over there. So that'll work for me. Right, so we've gone ahead and swapped out a few meshes using the 3 ways of doing it. And again, just a quick reminder, you can simply do this by dragging and dropping them in the viewport also. It's the same thing. I'm just trying to get you to practice understanding what inputs are here and how we can quickly swap in things depending on what asset type they are from the content browser. All right, so now we're going to do both of our things together. We're going to put materials on this. So I'm going to go and filter for material, and I'm going to put the static mesh filter off. So now I've got a range of materials I can work with. So let's go ahead and maybe throw on a stone texture here. That looks interesting. Let's try a few other ones. That doesn't look too good. It's repeating. Let's try see if we can get something interesting here. Where are the stone ones? What about this? That looks interesting. I'm happy with that. Okay. So I like this material. So we can drag and drop on, or again, I can select this and say use asset from content browser. So I've got this, or I can drag and drop it in there. They're all the same. Right. So we have our simple building ready to go. Now, if I was to press play, because by default, this is a third person template, even though there's no player start here, I can just press play and it'll throw a third person character in there. So you can see my character walks up to the wall, and oops, I actually wanted to use a window wall for this back one, which I didn't do. So again, good example here. It doesn't matter what order you do these things in. I'm just going to go ahead and use a 400 by 300 window wall. I'm just going to throw it in there, and then my static mesh quickly changes. Right, so no need to go and place and do things again. The wall just simply updates the static mesh. So if I hit play now, my character can go inside this house, and you will see the lighting is all interacting with the character. It's looking great. Our scene looks pretty nice. Right, so that was a simple kind of walkthrough of how you can swap out materials, swap out static meshes, quickly apply some textures, and use basic kind of manipulations to build a small house. But now we can talk about a little bit about the geometry brushes. So what happens when you want to do something non-uniform? Okay, so what happens if you want to create a shape that isn't creatable from the 4, or how many is that? That's from the 8 of these. What happens then? So that's kind of where geometry brushes excel. So to access geometry brushes, you will first place the actors panel, and then it'll be accessible from pressing the geometry button here. So the geometry brushes, you get a box, you get a cone, you get a cylinder, curved stairs, linear stairs, spiral stairs, and a sphere. So I'll show you how to use these things. If I drag and drop a geometry brush, I just get this simple cube, right? But the way of manipulating this cube is these numbers here. So the X, Y, and the Z. So if I was trying to make a wall, let's go ahead and first scale this guy down to something like 100, or even maybe 50. They're both okay. And then let's scale it up a little bit on the Y axis. So something like maybe 400. And on the Z, I'm going to go with 400 as well. Maybe 300. 400 is too much. Okay, so we've got this 300 by 400 wall, exactly what we were seeing earlier. So I'm just going to hit play to check my scale. That's kind of okay. It'll work for me. So we have our first wall, right? Let's copy paste this. Let's rotate it 90 degrees. And let's quickly place this in our scene, right? So we have it here. And let's place this here. Now, if I wanted to get this exact, like what I talked about in the first lesson, you could use exact numbers to get this to work, but I'm happy with this for now. This is okay. Let's copy paste the other wall. Just making sure that it's flush with this. So shift, and I'm just going to leave it there. Right, so we have the wall lining up perfectly, and I can see this isn't lined up, and we can use that. Okay, so everything's working great. We are going to copy paste this back wall, place it at the front of the house, make sure everything is flush. It's exactly where it needs to be. Okay, and that'll do for now. That's okay. Right, so we have all of these good to go. Now let's finally do our roof. Now with the roof, because the geometry brush, when you use these values, they're going to be on the local values. So remember when we talked about local and world values. So if you see here, this might be confusing to some people, which is why I'm mentioning it. You can see the x-axis is pointing this way. So if I scale up x, notice how it's actually not scaling x, it's actually scaling z. That's because we're in world axes right now. So if I press this, that is starting to look more like what we're seeing. So if I scale up the x, which we know is red, it starts to scale this way. So to make this thing wider, I will actually have to scale the y-axis, because that's, you can see that's green, and we know green is y. So I'll scale this up like this, and then now I have to scale the blue axis, which is z. And we get something looking like this. And I'll maybe make that roof a little thinner, and we get a similar structure to what we had earlier. Maybe I'm going to expand this a little bit so that it's exact. But yes, we have a structure similar to what we had earlier. That roof may need a little bit more. Sorry, I know I get obsessive over the alignments. I can almost never get them right, but I try to do whatever I can. Yeah, it's a rabbit hole almost trying to get these things lined up. But anyway, moving on. So we have our static mesh. Now, how would you create an inset inside this? This is kind of where static meshes are very powerful. So what I can do is I can take this box, and I can basically, first thing I want to do is I want to make this box a little narrow, as if it was going to be used to carve a hole out of my wall there. And then what you can do is you can take this this particular object, and you can set its mode, its brush type. You can set its brush type to subtractive. And then any mesh it intersects with, it's going to basically delete geometry. It's going to carve itself out of this. So if I take it and move it into the house and I let it go, you can see it's gone and created an inset there. So let's make this a little higher. So I'm going to scale it up on the z-axis. So maybe something like this. And then let's make it a little wider. So I can go press play and see. Now my character can walk through. So I've carved out a very simple kind of entry point into the house. Now I'll do the same thing with the cylinder. I'll take the cylinder and I'll use maybe 16 sides, and let's make this 100, and I'm going to rotate this. Now you may run into one problem. So if I've gone and I set this to subtractive, you may accidentally press out of this, and now there's no way to kind of click it again. If that happens, just find it in your outliner. So I've selected the cylinder brush and I've got access to it again. So let's go back into this and notice how I can, very quickly carve a hole out of this. So if I press play now, let's go and check our house out. Let's go, and you can see here now we have this kind of porthole in our house. Yeah, so that's one of the advantages of geometry brushes. They help you make really fancy shapes, and you can combine these things. So for example, if I had, let's go with 16 again and maybe 50, you can change this to an additive brush. And what an additive brush does is it just basically combines the two. So you can see now both of them are combined. So that's what an additive brush does. So additive adds to it, subtractive, is that what it's called? Yes, subtractive kind of removes from the mesh. All right. So that's one of the advantages of geometry brushes, but there's one more really cool advantage, which is texturing. So I'm going to explain this by copy pasting one of the walls and kind of bringing it out here. So with geometry brushes, they function a little bit differently as compared to static meshes. So if I was to take a cube and throw this cube out here, and let's go and filter for materials. Now, if I was to take any sort of texture, let's go see what we have. We've used a lot of stone. Let's search for wood. Okay, so we've got a few wood textures here. Now, if I was to take this and throw this on this, you can see that it's applied the wood texture to the entire object. But that's not how it works with the geometry brushes. What geometry brushes will do is it will apply the texture to a particular face. So what I mean by that is if I throw this oak wood texture onto this, notice how it's only applied the texture to that face. So I can apply a different texture here. I can apply a different texture here. I can apply a different texture here. And they're all different textures on one geometry mesh. Right, so that's kind of its advantage. The other really cool thing about this is you can actually change how the texture is mapped to that particular object, how the texture is mapped to the geometry. So for example, if I go over to stone, we had this particular stone object here, the stone texture rather, right? So if you have one of these or one of these, whichever one you want to use. But let's say now you are not happy with the density, how kind of dense this texture is on it. What you can do is you can click to select this geometry brush and scroll down. So if you can't see it, just maximize it. If you just press all, and under all you have this surface properties area. Here you have these two values called the U and the V value. You can basically go 2 and 2 and press apply, and notice how that texture just gets more, stones get larger, and it's almost like the texture was spread out better, right? So you can use that. You can also rotate your texture. You can rotate it as much as you want depending on what you're going for, and then you can also move your texture. So you can press the pan and the direction of the panning, so you can either move it to the right, or in this case to the left, or to the right. You can go up or you can go down, right? So it's very, very nice for if you've got multiple kind of pieces that you want to line them up and they're not lining up. You can use these pan and get them to line up exactly so that they appear like they're all one piece, but actually they're many little pieces working together. A use case for this would be, for example, if you're working on a game that required you to kind of show that diagonal cobblestone ground. So you could go with, for example, I click on this mesh and I go 45 degrees. So now you've got that tiled cobblestone ground. Now, if you're not happy with, like maybe these stones are looking too big for your particular design, you can take these and maybe go 1.5 and 1.5, and then the tiling becomes a little smaller. You can go all the way back down to 1, right? So you have something like this. So it's very, very powerful for giving you a little bit more control over your texture. Not only are you getting increased control over what designs you make, but you're also getting a very, very solid control over the texturing on your object, right? At this introductory level. Then you can, I'll show you a little bit about the stairs. You get these beautiful stairs that you can work with, and then you can choose like the inner radius, the outer radius, you know, how these stairs work, the angle of the curve. You know, maybe you're going for like a tower that kind of just constantly goes up, and then the character can walk over it. And these are all ready to play right out of. So you can have your character kind of climb the level. So lots of fun. So for example, here, let's say you were working on the mesh. Now you wanted to carve a piece out here. Maybe you've got a pillar here. You can use the box, and let's say maybe you rotate it and you change its mode to subtractive. So now when you place it here, it carves this kind of piece out of it. And notice how well the texture is working. The textures are all lining up, and it's trying to work around what you, the artist, have created here. So now we can combine these two and go maybe for a, let's say a cube. I'll rotate that to exactly what this was, and maybe we can scale this up, and let's make this really large. Right? And then maybe I can go and throw that texture on it, which is not looking very great because I've scaled it. But yeah, you get the point. We can use this to create the thing. In fact, that texture scaling wasn't great. I'm going to use the geometry brush to do the same thing. So let's use the older geometry brush. So where is that brush? That brush is here. Let's just copy paste this and change its mode to additive, right? So we've got this. Now I can just kind of reduce its size a little bit to give that feeling of depth here. Now I can scale it up. So let's go with increase it on the Z a little bit. So here you can see the tiling is so much better on the geometry brush, which was absolutely not working on that static mesh that I placed earlier. Now on this particular brush, I can go ahead and say, all right, I want the stones to look really large on this. So I can increase the tiling on the sides that I'm interested in. So we have larger stones that my character can interact with, and then just kind of make sure that everything lines up. Okay, so when I hit play, you can see that we now have these stone pillars that are almost cut through our mesh. And this can be done on any texture that you want, but I'm just showing you some simple use cases of geometry brushes inside of Unreal Engine. All right, so we've covered meshes, we've covered the geometry brushes, we've looked at this. We're building on upon how to build our worlds, how to add our own designs to an interactive world. And we talked a little bit about maps. We talked a little bit about how to save maps, how to make new maps. We also talked about swapping out objects that we can clearly see have inputs, such as static meshes and materials. So again, let's just end with decorating the house that we worked so hard to build. I'm going to use the wood texture here. So I'm just going to put a wood texture. Let's increase its size by maybe 2 and 2. Hit apply. I don't like that so much. Let's go 1.5 and 1.5. And let's rotate that by 45 degrees. So you can see very quickly, you can come up with some interesting texturing for your objects. This would be very useful if you're working in like an architectural type environment. And then maybe inside, if we have a floor. So let's assume there's a floor in this house. And then maybe here, let's see if they've given us some marble. So marble, we have no marble. Let's see if we can come up with something. Let's see what we can find. Maybe inside there is just cobblestone, right? So we have this cobblestone inside the house. So when we hit play, we can see inside the house we have this stone and everything is working as intended. And then you can take this further by putting maybe some concrete in here. Maybe the inside of the house is concrete, but only that particular wall is wooden. But yeah, as you can see, it gives you more control, but it may be a little slow, especially in the initial stages. But yeah, have as much fun as you want with this. Try to build different objects. Try to use the geometry brushes to come up with non-primitive shapes. Try to use the stairs. Try to build a small house. Try to take it a step further. Try to make more than one. Make maybe a small village that you can hit play, and then the players have a series of houses they can go and explore, and you can put objects inside of them. So again, to put objects like we talked about in our first class, you can take these objects, drag and drop them out here, rotate, scale, and move them as desired. And then this will just kind of get you comfortable with using these tools to place objects in your level. So maybe there's some chairs in here. So maybe 1, 2, and then maybe there's a third chair that's just kind of bent off. You hit play. So now you've got a range of things that you've done with your scene. But yep, that was a little bit about what we talked about in class. So we talked about the geometry brushes, texturing, swapping out static meshes, non-uniform modeling, and then modeling using the geometry brushes. And then of course the environment light mixer, and finally how to save your levels and just explore templates. So again, think about what we learned today and how you can make really cool kind of assets for maybe a vehicle template or a first person template or even a third person template. So just taking it a step further, and maybe you could combine these with the learning kit that we talked about in week 1. And yes, I look forward to seeing you in session 1 of week 2. Thank you very much.